Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Somerford's Technology Podcast. We're having a series of conversations with experts about technologies that will solve your problems. We dive into them with practical examples and look ahead at future trends too. And why? Because Somerford is here to help. And we partner with lots of the best technology providers to provide a suite of solutions for you. I'm Anne. I'm the Solutions Technical Director at Somerford. And today I'm honoured to talk to Steve Nesbitt, Office 365 expert at Varonis. I think that's your title, Steve.
Yeah, close. Hello everyone. So my name's Steve Nesbitt. I'm actually a systems engineer at Varonis. So I joined about a year ago. I am the Office 365 sort of specialist for the UK as well. By dint of the fact that I came directly from Varonis from Microsoft, where I worked in the sort of Microsoft 365 space for nearly 7 years in the enterprise team. So, yeah, a lot of experience in that kind of area.
Yeah, and that's why I want to talk to you, because clearly most or all of us will be working from home due to the pandemic. And so securing our remote working, and most of that's in Microsoft as well. So securing remote working practices is just a really prevalent topic. So thanks for coming.
No problem at all. Thanks for having me.
So you've already touched on it, actually. You've been in technology for a while. What brought you from Microsoft to Varonis?
Yeah, without going into too much of my life story, I've always kind of, since the end of university, been sort of specialised around unstructured data and information lifecycle management generally. Before I joined Microsoft, I worked for companies that did migrations primarily for SharePoint up to SharePoint Online, but also file servers into SharePoint and SharePoint Online. And moving to Microsoft was a sensible next step, as obviously Office 365 grew in popularity. I think by the time I kind of left Microsoft, the majority of customers that I was working with were pretty much bought into the stack of products that I was directly responsible for selling and supporting. And so I was looking for a new challenge, and I really had two options. One which was to kind of move internally within Microsoft, look for a role perhaps in the security team, or perhaps an even broader role as an account technical specialist or strategist, as they're sometimes known. And but Varonis really appealed to me because it kind of covered off a couple of areas that I thought were important. The first one was that we specialize in unstructured data and the protection and management and prevention of threats around that. But also they are a cybersecurity company, and that was an area I wanted to get into. So they were a nice sort of bridge between the world that I knew in terms of managing unstructured data and the world that I wanted to get into, which was cybersecurity.
Yeah. One of those career moves that's perfect, tick on everything.
Indeed, yeah.
But Varonis itself, you say it's cybersecurity. It has about 16 modules, I think.
Yes.
So sometimes I find it, even though I'm a partner, find it quite difficult to grasp what it does, because it can be tailored so much to a particular company. Can you explain it a bit more?
No, I can try. I mean, I guess from my perspective, I'm not really phased by it too much, because having 16 modules compared to Microsoft 365 is not really comparable. I mean, there must be, I don't even know how many different products there are within that set. But I think Varonis, there's three kind of primary areas that it works in. And the first one is data protection. And so whether your data is in the cloud or on premises, in Office 365 or a Windows file or a NetApp box or wherever it is, we look to classify that data and look at the access control around it with a goal to getting down to least privileged access on those sensitive or non-sensitive data assets. And that's really kind of point one. If you don't know where your data is, you don't know what it is, you don't know who's accessing it, how can you ever say that access is appropriate? Yeah. And that's what we find is a challenge for a lot of customers. Point two is then compliance. Okay, so if I don't understand my data, how can I ever prove compliance in terms of access? And so internal and external audit and compliance requirements is sort of the second place where we help. Well, once we've got an understanding of the data and the access, and we can remediate that down to least privilege, we can then help people with things like data subject access requests, regular reporting on the way that data and access is changing, and that can be useful for, as I've said, internal requirements, but also things like GDPR compliance and things like that.
Must have had fun a couple of years ago when.
Yeah, indeed. Well, I mean, I think it definitely didn't hurt Varonis in terms of a piece of legislation that came out. But I think what it did was sort of codify a lot of the challenges that were already existing, and that most organisations knew existed, but perhaps didn't have a compelling reason to tackle at that time. So if we move on from data protection and compliancy, the third place is then threat detection and response. And again, if you don't know what's normal about your data, what's important, where it is, and who has access to it, how can you find out what's abnormal and malicious.
Mm-hmm.
And so once you get to that position where you understand your data and you understand who has access to it and you understand that that's appropriate, you then can start building a threat detection response capability on top of that to say, okay, now we're aware that Steve is accessing this piece of data. He's never accessed it before. It's sensitive. It's stale. Nobody's touched it in a year. He's now uploaded it to OneDrive for Business and shared it anonymously. That kind of thing is very difficult to detect if you don't understand the data and access what's normal, and you can build out what we call a peacetime profile. How are you supposed to
I
sort
like
of
that.
Yeah, it's very American, but it does tend to sort of capture what we're trying to do here. But if you can't understand these things, it's very difficult to understand that maybe that account's been compromised, or maybe you've got an insider threat. Someone, an Edward Snowden type character, someone who's decided one day that they're not happy and they want to take reams of data.
Yeah.
And I think the one thing that has helped, ever since this coronavirus outbreak has kind of pushed everyone from home, if anything, cyber threats have gotten worse. And we've seen, more and more phishing attacks, utilizing people's fear about the pandemic to get any sort of information and click on anything and, enter their details into any site if it makes them feel like they're getting the most up-to-date information. And cyber criminals are exploiting the fear around this.
Yeah.
And then you align the fact that now suddenly we have, thousands of people working from home who weren't before, maybe hundreds of thousands, on perhaps untrusted devices that maybe aren't patched, on unsecure Wi-Fi, on VPNs that have suddenly had to times by 5 the number of people that they're servicing. And of course, a lot of this data is now living in the cloud in Teams. And so we've got a bit of a perfect storm. And we've seen a few companies, lately where those attacks have happened. And Varonis has been the only piece of software that's actually been able to detect them.
Find it. Wow. So can I have an example? It sounds like there's 3 sections, like data protection,
broadly,
compliance, and then threat detection and response. That sounds like a sort of maturity model almost. Can you describe to me a company that is full on nailed their data protection and their compliance, and they're really using Varonis for threat detection?
Yes, I mean, we've got a number of those, as you might expect. I mean, I'm not going to be able to say any names, but generally speaking, we scale out to whatever size environment that you have. We have customers of 100 users to customers with 200,000.
Wow. And
hundreds and thousands of filers that are being pushed into the environment every day, with billions of events that we're correlating from those file systems, and Office 365 as well. Varonis is a platform that can scale out, but as you said, it is kind of a maturity process. So we start, as I said before, with that understanding of the data. And that enables us to prioritize, because if you do have millions of folders with, potentially, petabytes of data in there, or even more, you've got to a situation where where do you even start? And that kind of paralysis is a big problem within the industry. With classifying data, we can actually say, okay, well, these are the areas where that type of sensitive information, the thing that you are most concerned about, actually lives. And it's here we can start with the remediation. And so that's where we can start to put a little bit of a project plan in place to say, okay, we can do this. Varonis also has tools to automate a lot of this stuff as well. So things like global access, where you may have the everyone group or authenticated users that have access across, reams of data. We can remove that automatically using our automation engine tool. And we've got another tool called Data Transport Engine, which enables you to take stale data away from heavily processed areas into archives where you can lock it down, maybe make it read only, and while allowing people to apply for additional access, once they find that stub file. Yeah. So we go through a process of understanding the data and the access, and then we can start to work on that idea of managing and automating the process. Varonis then acts as almost like a watchdog on what's happening from a trends perspective. We have dashboards where you can see, this is sensitive data of this type is increasing. But what we tend to see a lot of people do is create, reports and alerts around specific things that are of interest to them.
Yeah.
So for an Office 365 example, we might say something like, show me any time an external user is added to a team that contains this type of sensitive data. External users is being used as a feature in Office 365, but we want to know if external users are being added into these environments. And those are the sort of things that we can alert on, that we can report on, so we give data owners that visibility.
Yeah.
And ultimately, the idea is to get to a maturity point where data owners are basically completely responsible for the entitlement reviews for their data, whether it's in Office 365 or on-prem, and they can decide whether or not people get access or are removed based upon the data that is in those locations. The ideal situation, obviously, is taking IT a little bit out of that loop, so they're not acting as a bottleneck.
Yeah, not a bottleneck, but then actually, but still secure. Because I can imagine at the moment there's this acceleration, obviously, towards remote working, where people probably were thinking of doing it, but have to done it quicker. So now perhaps they may have done shortcuts, and they may now need to start thinking about security if they have the capacity. Because I get the sense from our clients that they're quite, they're maxed out right now. It's sort of survival mode. So is Varonis working to kind of help prioritize and just help out at this time?
Yeah, I mean, we've had 2 years of digital transformation in a month, basically.
Yeah.
I think is a fair comment. And a lot of our customers have had to do exactly that. Business continuity, business as usual, takes priority over everything else.
Mm-hmm.
We're now getting to a situation where people are starting to say, okay, now what have we actually done?
What have we done to it?
Yeah, what have we done?
What's happened now?
What's happened? And that lack of visibility is making people very nervous. Now, with a product like Office 365 and Teams, you're really democratizing the creation of environments. They're all pretty much flat by default. Everyone can see everything in every team they're a member of. And it's really easy to get kind of oversharing kind of permissions, whether internal or external, to those locations.
That's why I love it, though, because it's flat. It's adopted so fast. And
exactly.
I suppose Microsoft have that driver that they want the adoption to be fast.
Yeah, and we want to, and our goal really is to support that. So we're saying, coronavirus has kicked things off from an acceleration perspective. But even so, we want to be able to, turn around to IT and say, you can feel comfortable rolling Teams out in the way that it was intended and drive that adoption, because we can give you the insight, the reporting, and the understanding of the data that's in that environment. So all of that is key to our message. And when we go to talk to customers, it's really about making the most of the investment that they've made in their collaboration technologies, right? Yeah. By getting as many people and as much data into those as possible and making the best use of them.
Yeah. And what are the sort of risks of if you don't have that visibility?
Well, yeah, I mean, just a simple. I mean, I do kind of a webinar, which has been very popular over the last month, where I just take sort of a simple example of a team with 7 members, one of whom is an external user, and all they've done is they've added this external user at the team's level just to review an employment contract within this team. And the employment contract's the first piece of information that's in there. But then, of course, more information gets put in there. 7 people, all of whom can add data. All of that data, all of it could be sensitive or none of it could be sensitive. But ultimately, the external user has access to all of it without any restrictions.
That flat thing again.
Yeah, exactly, because it's flat by design. Now, that's not necessarily a problem unless the team changes focus over time and no one is on top of the remediation of the permissions. So I don't know about you, but when you're in, when I was at Microsoft, I was probably in about anywhere between 30 and 40 teams at any one given time. I had absolutely no idea what information was in those teams that I'd put in there, never mind anybody else had put in there. And without the classification and being able to report on that, that's really difficult. The other thing I'd say is as well is that, just because you have members of a team, it doesn't stop you sharing. So I can go into Office, for example, or the SharePoint back end of Teams and share the file with someone who's not in the team. But as a Teams member, I can't see that share happened. I have to go to SharePoint to check that out. Likewise, I can share the entire SharePoint site. And as a Teams owner, I have no idea that happened.
So there's no one place to kind of... Varonis is the one place to see.
Varonis is one place, but yes.
There's no native... Why not?
Well, and this is what baffles a lot of people. They say, well, surely this is strange thing to have happened, but it's happened simply because neither SharePoint nor Exchange with Office 365 groups, nor Azure Active Directory, nor any of the other components that back-end Teams were ever built for Teams in the first place. Mm-hmm. Teams was put on top of a number of different solutions that already existed and already had their own functionality. And I can give you another example. So if you want to use a private channel in a team, so a private channel is where, say, you have 10 members of the team and one of them is external. You may want to create a channel where you can put a file that external person can't see. So you can almost like have a sub-permissions group of, say, 5 people out of the 10 that only are allowed in this private channel. Now, as we all know, every time you create a Teams, you create a SharePoint site at the back end. But because you can only have one set of permissions on a document library, in order to facilitate a private channel, you have to create another SharePoint site that has nothing to do with the SharePoint site that you've just created other than, sort of simple navigation in the hub. That SharePoint site that you've just created doesn't show up in SharePoint admin. So as a SharePoint administrator, I can't see it.
Oh dear.
And that obviously can then contain sensitive information, that's shared with those people. I can see it as a Teams owner that it's there, but as an admin, I'm not going to add myself to every team. I might have 10,000 every team and start looking at where the private channels are. Now I can run PowerShell scripts, but how would I even know to run them if I don't know that to exist in the first place? And so all of these things aren't a problem when you've got 10 teams. But when you've got 1,000 teams or 10,000 teams, then you start to get to a point where actually you start thinking, I have absolutely no idea, realistically, of what's happening, even in one of these environments, if certain conditions are met. Now, you could argue, yeah, we can block it down, we can cut external sharing out and take away public links, and we can make IT create every team to a template, and you absolutely can do that. But the one thing you'll do there is kill adoption.
Yeah, and what I find when I've worked in fast-paced environments and in consultancies, you're just focused on getting the work done. So if there's a barrier from IT or from something, you're just going to just go around it like water, and that's where the really insecurity happens.
Exactly, and you end up in Dropbox or you end up with email, and then you've got to ask yourself, well, is our DLP solution, at the edge, is that going to stop this? Well, chances are it's going to stop some things and maybe not stop others. So having files in SharePoint, in Teams, shared externally is good. It's because the file never leaves.
Yeah.
It's only the access that changes, so we can monitor that. But unfortunately, because we've got this situation of Office 365 groups, SharePoint, OneDrive for Business, Azure Active Directory, Teams, internal and external sharing settings at the tenant level, SharePoint level, OneDrive level, all this complication, you then times that by how many people and how many teams that you're creating. And suddenly answering a simple question like, where is up my GDPR-related data in Office 365 suddenly becomes very, very problematic.
You need Varonis, right?
you need a solution around that's designed to take all that information and put it into a solution that's designed to give you those answers across both. Because the other point I always make as well is most organizations, there's very few that I've come across. There are a few, but not many, have data on premises as well.
Yes,
even
hybrid.
Though they've gone to Teams, right? And they end up in that hybrid scenario.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say 90-odd%, that's a very spurious statistic, but most of what's in E5 and Office 365 is designed for the cloud, right? It's designed to look at information that's in the cloud. There are some on-premises components like AIP Scanner, but most of it is cloud-focused.
So Varonis can go across the both?
Varonis exactly is designed to go across the both. So you have a unified classification schema.
That's useful.
You have, across both. You have threat detection across both. You have the ability to report across both. So if I ask a question, okay, where has Steve got access to GDPR data across everything? That's a single report in Varonis.
So when I have other partners like Splunk, for example. So if there's a seam in Splunk, that I know exactly who's going to be logging into that every day. So if a company gets it, the SOC will have. Splunk can be used for all sorts, but just for this small example, the SOC team would be logging into Splunk all the time, and they'll get really familiar with the technology. So I'm not really sure who's logging into Varonis and in which team, and
that can be a question, for most organizations. I think generally speaking, we require someone in security to have at least some access to the tool, but we may decide that actually the alerts that we create, we obviously clean up and enrich. So we're bringing all this alert information in on the data, on understanding the access and everything else. We're bringing it in. We're enriching it with things like geolocation, the context around the structured data, whether or not the person who's acting is an executive or an admin or something. Basically all that enrichment information is added into that alert. We then push that alert into a scene if required. So you can use Varonis' dashboard if you prefer. And you can see our events that are obviously created around, like a easy to use kind of forensics tool where you can drill down in and get a lot of understanding of what's going on. But as you say, it may be that actually it's going to be the SOC who need to understand this. So Varonis can be actually, with Splunk in itself, we can actually deliver our dashboards through Splunk. And we can also take those alerts and push them into pretty much any SIEM environment and be part of that larger security workflow.
Thank you. That actually really makes sense. What I was also interested in is your risk assessments, because I think at the moment, because people are, in survival mode in business.
Yeah.
And what I think you guys help out is by doing that free risk assessment, so they get most of the value of the Varonis product. Do they get the drill downs?
Yeah, they get everything, basically.
They get everything?
I mean, they get everything. Wow. So a risk assessment is kind of a tried and true part of Varonis' sales process for a long time. It's basically the way that we want to work with a company, not just to show them a whole bunch of demos and sort of pretty graphs. We want to actually show them what the reality is in their environment.
Yeah.
So we actually undertake a piece of work that someone in myself or my role would do, which is we come in, we install the product, and we basically give you an extended trial for all the components in it. Mm-hmm. We connect up to, your Office 365 probably for a given, then either all or some of the file store data. And we basically walk that information to get the structure of the file share, the taxonomy, and also all the access control lists and the groups around AD. And from that first day, we're starting to profile out the organization, and we're starting to build out the alerting, understand, where users have access, alert on things like global access groups, where people are being added permissions, etc. And all that is basically kicked off from day one.
Wow.
Depending on the size of the environment, the classification takes a little while to go and pick everything up, because it's having to go through and sort of index all that information. But when it's completed, we've then got a situation where you have a fully functioning environment across all your data sources. And at that point, you can start to then set up and start to run reports. And we'll actually produce a presentation or a document for you that tells you, here's all your data, here's all the sensitive data, here's all what it is, and here's where it is. Here's how much of it's stale, here's how much of it's globally accessible. And we actually produce that as an output of the data risk assessment.
So they can get a one for free, just this is my risk at the moment. And
yes.
All the best vendors do that, don't they? Because they... Splunk does that as well with a free POC environment, because the product's good. So It's just about helping in this crazy time. And, this is your risks at the moment. Going forward, use Varonis, you don't use something else, but use manual if you're crazy enough. But this is where you stand.
Well, we know the product's good enough, and we also know that there will be something.
You've got some pretty crazy stories.
Yeah, rare is the occasion that we don't find something. And one of the things that attracted me to the company when I was doing my due diligence around joining Varonis, because it's a big move from Microsoft.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're in Microsoft, it's actually really hard to get back in. And so I didn't leave lightly. It's not not an easy choice. But one of the things I liked most about it when I was going through the interviews, some of the stories that we find of some of the interesting things that you can find in environments. And so, most organizations will have, some problems that we can help with, and we feel like we can prove that out. I think the other thing that I'll mention as well is, especially in this time period, we're putting extended trials out for our VPN monitoring software that also looks at DNS and web proxy, because although we look at, primarily data, as that's the sort of core of the company, we feel that we need to be able to look at that VPN traffic, DNS and proxy to be able to alert on things like, brute force attacks or exfiltration events on that data. We need that full picture. So we're offering extended trials at the moment via this DRA. So even if the only thing you want to do is get better visibility into what's happening on your data for 3 months, come and talk to us, and we'll put the DRA in, and you can, then make a decision at the end of that period when hopefully things are back to normal.
Yeah.
Whether or not, that's something you want to pursue longer term. But Varonis make this investment on the DRAs because we feel confident that we'll find something interesting and useful for you, and B, it's a useful exercise for us as well, because we're always learning from our customers.
So DRA's data risk assessment, they can get in touch with, that's all right. I'll probably put if it's okay, Steve, I'll put your link in the email, or they can just get to marketing@somerfordassociates.com too. That would work. Any route in. But so we're talking now a lot about now in the pandemic time, or just coming out of the pandemic, fingers crossed. What, in your opinion, are the next big shifts that we should be preparing for?
Oh, that's a really difficult question at the moment. It's really hard at the minute. I think for us, as a company, we want to be we want to expand out the number of sources that we touch. So being able to touch more cloud environments other than just Office 365 that may contain data.
Oh, Google Cloud?
Yeah, well, possibly. You know, you can
don't make any promises.
You can make your you can insert the cloud providers as you like there. But we really want to do that. We also want to ensure that everything that we can that we do is parity across all the different environments that we support. So there's a lot of work going on in terms of that. In terms of where I see customers going, there's only I feel it's only one way. I think more and more people are going to work from home. More and more data is going to the cloud.
Yeah.
But one thing is absolutely clear is more and more sophisticated cyber attacks will be coming out there, either from nation states or individuals. We've had one today, a new group that we're monitoring.
Ooh, really?
Yeah, so I can't really say much about it, but we have an offering for our customers and prospects, which is delivered via our incident response team, and that's free as well. So as part of any Varonis customer can call on our incident response team at any time free of charge if they have a breach.
Wow,
really? We will work with the customer, and we'll work with whoever else they've got involved, including the authorities, to help them understand, recover, and remediate, and also prevent any future activities. And we do this a lot. Varonis is the only company, and although I've not spent a long time in cybersecurity talking to my colleagues, Varonis is the only company I know that offers that kind of service completely free of charge. And even if you're a prospect and you happen to have installed and something happens during our trial period that is problematic for you, our incident response team will get involved and help you understand what's happened and how best to remediate it. So there's one of the things I like about the company is there's real investment in not just in making the tools, obviously appropriate and useful, but actually the sort of capabilities around them that you might need in order to get the most out of that investment.
Them. Yeah. So you think people are going to home more, to cloud more, and we're just going to get ridiculously sophisticated attacks?
Well, yeah, and I don't think you have to have got a crystal ball or have any sort of great insight in order to come up with that list of things that I just came up with. But
it's all right. I'm glad we agree, at least. Yeah, I see that too.
So, I mean, I think generally speaking, that's the way we're going to go. I think Teams is now de facto out there. One thing that Microsoft has always been trying to do is push adoption. This pandemic has pretty much kicked the door wide open for this adoption of Teams as pretty much now the go-to collaboration or the gold standard go-to collaboration platform. We've talked a little bit about some of the issues that incurs, but Varonis are at pains to point out that, no matter what your Microsoft licensing is, whether you're E3 or E5, we're collaborative with that. We're partners with Microsoft. We want to work with them alongside people like yourselves to be able to ensure that people get the best out of not only their investment in Varonis, but their investment in Microsoft as well.
Yeah. Well, look, thank you so much for coming in. It's really hard to book you in to actually talk because you're so popular. You're talking to all of these people about this topic because it's so relevant right now. Yeah. So I do really appreciate your time you've spent to talk with us, and I have such a much better picture about Varonis and how it can fit in with the organisation now. So thank you.
No problem. And hopefully, if you're listening to this, please get in touch via the guys here, and we can do something to help.
Yeah, brilliant. So as usual, listeners, as Somerford Associates, we're here to help. So if you do want more and to reach Steve as well, just reach out. So I'll have links to all the things we've talked about on our Somerford Associates webpage. You can subscribe to the podcast from your usual podcast provider too. Yes, and as Steve says, we can arrange a call with him if you want to talk directly about it in your company too. So thanks for listening to the Somerford podcast. Man, I'll see you next time.